And I came to the conclusion that the American dream was dead. There's just no way I can do better for my kids or that my kids would do better. I was at that sort of state. And I remembered a question or a chide, if you will, that the professor had said, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Well, I determined that I was going to do whatever it took to figure out how to become wealthy. And so I started reading a lot of books. And I think some of the books that I read prior to Nelson's book sort of paved the way for me to understand Nelson's book. But when I read Nelson's book, the whole world seemed like to change for me. I was so excited that I knew now that my kids would do better. I'd be able to help my kids in ways that Dad had helped me. It just got me so excited. And as all of a sudden, man, this is for real.
Well, Jason, thank you for joining us on the Infinite Banking Initiative. We really appreciate you joining us today. And we wanted to start off by hearing how you came across the infinite banking concept. Tell us about that journey.
Okay, well, I'm not positive exactly the date when it happened. However, I do remember very distinctly my parents took all of us kids and the grandkids on a cruise. It was their 65th wedding anniversary, and that was about July of 2006. A little bit before that, I was reading an online newspaper, and there was an ad for a get a free report. Don't even remember whose free report it was. I got it, I read it, and it's kind of described. At the very beginning, they said, everything I'm going to teach or everything I'm saying, I got from my mentor, Nelson Nash, and his book, Becoming Your Own Banker. Well, anyway, I got that report, read it, and I was just blew my mind. I was so excited. So I went and looked for Becoming Your Own Banker. Well, Amazon didn't have it. It said it was out of stock. I went to every bookstore, and I live in Utah, and so every bookstore I could find within about 200 miles where I was, they did not have it. And so then I started calling used bookstores. Would you have this book? Do you have this book? You said didn't have it. And I got really frustrated, and a few months went by or something, and then I decided to check again, and it was in stock at Amazon. What I later figured out is in between editions. I think it's in between the third and fourth or something right around in that scenario, right? Because the very first book I got, his picture's on the front, and the next one has the bank lock. And so I got the book, I read it and couldn't sleep. And so the next day when I got home from work, I read the book again, and my wife was like, what are you reading? And I said, you have to read this book. And then shortly thereafter, we went on this cruise with my family. Now, on that cruise, there was nearly 70 of us. So I'm the youngest of 9 kids, and 8 of us were there, our wives, our children. I mean, I didn't have all my children at that time, but, we just went. And I had prepared a little something for every one of my siblings. Say, you must read this. And I was crazy about it, right? And my one brother says, oh, yeah, I read that 5 years ago. And I about came unglued. I says, why didn't you share it with me? Why aren't you doing this? He says, I didn't know how to do it. So I need to back up a little bit. When I got through reading it the second time, on the back of the book, there's a phone number. I picked up my phone and I called, and Nelson answered the phone. And I had the most delightful conversation with him. We talked about it. I don't even know how long it was. It was a while. He was so accommodating and willing to teach me. I was just brand new, right? And I said, I don't care what the distance is. I don't care what the money is. Who's the best person to learn from? And in hindsight, it's like, why did I ask him that? He's the best person to learn from, right? Who close to me? And so he pointed me to a couple of agents that we could eventually get to talk to. I didn't know that it was selling insurance. I mean, it was insurance, but I didn't know anything about being an agent, right? And so I met with that person a couple of times, and then they said, well, maybe you want to do this too. I said, well, I'm a vice president of a small chemical company. I don't need this. But then I thought, when you teach it, you learn it best. So I said, okay, I'm going to do this part-time. And then over the course of the next 5 years while I was doing it part-time, I think we invested to have Nelson come to Logan, Utah, I think 3 times and do his seminar, which was, in the event you could get anybody there, they became a client, right? When they would sit there Friday evening from say 5 to 9 o'clock, and then 6 or 7, 8 hours the next day, as long as Nelson would go, when they were done, they were bouncing off the walls and they were ready to do it. And so I heard his seminar live that 3 times. And I believe another time at the think tank, he went through it. One of the early think tanks, he went through his seminar. So that's kind of the basis of how I found out about it was my journey. It was just like, I'm like backing up again. I had my wife read it. She was like, we got to do this. And I've been a practitioner ever since. I mean, I was there when the very first they announced the IBI, Infinite Banking Institute, right, which is now the Nelson Nash Institute. I jumped right in. I've been an authorized practitioner from the very beginning. I don't know how many actually signed up and passed the test before me. I don't think very many. But David would have to tell me that. But there's not many that have been around in the Institute longer than I have.
That's a good early first person narrative. Because, more and more folks now don't know the man because they've never met him. Nelson did pass in 2019, unfortunately. But you're one of the first generation, that saw him live 3 times in Logan, Utah. Came to the think tanks. Yeah, he loved to talk to folks. Man, he was a real people person, obviously, and he was really appreciative of somebody loved his book, obviously. And that got him going, man. So you told me, I think about you taking that cruise with 70 family members. And, that would have been a good time to sell the book to everybody, and start getting some policies and underwriting. So have you followed up on that and done that recently?
At that time, I wasn't thinking about doing it as a business, right? My family had to know about this, right? And Nelson used to talk about his brother, right? He says his brother sold him his first policy. And he says, when I graduate from this life, after the pleasantries, there's going to be a mind-to-mind meeting or a come to Moses meeting. I don't remember the exact term, right? Because I'm going to ask him, why didn't you teach me not to use my dividends to pay my premiums? If I would put more premium in there, my policy would have been better, stronger, all these different things. The story's in, I think, Building Your Warehouse for Wealth anyway. But he would talk about that. I have a similar thing. It's like I had 2 brothers. Okay. I actually have 6 brothers, but 2 of my brothers had read that book 5 or 6 years before I saw it. So we're talking 2001, maybe even 2000, because my one brother had sold insurance, done a little bit of insurance. And I was just like so ticked off. Why didn't you share this with me? Right. And neither one of them had followed through, because the one, he says, I didn't know how to do it. So he just kind of gave up on it. He says, I'd like to do it. Well, of course, he's a client now. He has 3 policies, some decent policies too. He's done really good. But anyway, yeah, I have multiple family members that were on that cruise that are now have policies.
So what was it, Jason, that kept you up that night, that after you read Becoming Your Own Banker? It doesn't really talk about insurance so much. There's a lot of things in there about human conditions and, what was it that just jumped out to you that you really immediately gravitated towards?
At the time, I need to give you a little bit of background and history here for the fact that growing up, I was always instructed or encouraged to get a good education and get a good job, right? And everything would be fine. And I took that to the extreme. I got a PhD in chemistry, and then I did postdoctoral work at Caltech for a guy that won the Nobel Prize a couple of years after I was there. I mean, I worked in some pretty prestigious places, and then I went to San Francisco Bay Area, and I actually started at 6-figure job, right? Yet I was still going paycheck to paycheck. I remember very distinctly being on the interstate on the way home from the lab, dead stop in traffic, and my oldest son was playing a t-ball game. And I was like, what am I doing? I will never be able to do for my kids what my dad's done for me. I mean, I came to the conclusion that the American dream was dead. There's just no way I can do better for my kids, or that my kids would do better than me. I was at that sort of state. And I remembered a question or a chide, if you will, that the professor had said, well, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? Well, I determined that I was going to do whatever it took to figure out how to become wealthy. And so I started reading a lot of books. And I think some of the books that I read prior to Nelson's book sort of paved the way for me to understand Nelson's book. But when I read Nelson's book, it just, the whole world seemed like to change for me. I was so excited that I knew now that my kids would do better. I'd be able to help my kids in ways that Dad had helped me. Really, that's what, it just got me so excited. And as all of a sudden, man, this is for real. It spoke to my soul. I don't know if that's the right thing to say, but it just felt so right. And at least twice a year, since I read it that first time and the second time, at least twice a year, I read the book every year, twice. I do have an agency. I'm a general agent, and I have agents that work with me. And every year, towards the end of the year, as part of the year's waning and stuff, we read the book together. I assign them a section. They come back for training we do it on Tuesdays, and we discuss it. David can even chime in, because occasionally I'll call him, what does this mean? Because there's some really nuances to that book and some deeper dives when you understand it, that it just gets better and better and better. It's phenomenal. There's very few books that I have read as many times as Nelson's book.
When you ask me, what does that mean? Do I say, I'll get back to you, or
Most of the time you tell me, and I said, well, this is what Nelson used to say. I don't think anytime you've ever said, I'll get back to you. It seemed like, so maybe I'm not asking hard enough questions.
Well, so yeah, Jason, you were one of the V people who, knew Nelson, and had a relationship with him and had him out in person for seminars, that sort of thing. What's kind of your favorite memory when you think about Nelson? Can you share that with some of our listeners and viewers who did not have the opportunity to meet him?
There was one time we were in Las Vegas, and I don't remember if that was for a think tank or something else. Anyway, and I'd been doing a part-time. I wasn't a general agent. I was just, kind of this part-time kid doing whatever I needed to do, right? And so my general agent said, hey, do you want to come to dinner? And so Nelson and I, we went to dinner at Ruth Chris. And I mean, he was delightful, right? Because the only thing that I'd experienced was probably just like, this guy, he comes out, he says, stinking thinking, it kind of started his seminar, was just, you got to think right. And that's what we were starting. It's kind of a stern guy from the South, and it's like, wow. But at dinner, he was just so delightful, a great conversation. He was gracious, it did not pass him in the fact that we were at Ruth Chris, which is a fairly expensive restaurant in Las Vegas, right? And it was just fun. It really was. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I felt like I was in the presence of celebrity, but he treated me very, very kindly. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it probably helped that somebody else was paying for the dinner too.
Yet he didn't go, and what I mean by that, he didn't like, I'll order this, and I'll order that, and I'll order this, and not eat it all, right? He was still gracious. He finished everything, having grown up in the youngest of 9 kids. I'm at the lowest totem pole, and so I ate everything that hit my plate. But he was the same way. He was just a Southern gentleman, I guess, is a really good description.
Yeah, tell us about early on when you decided to move from the part-time, do this part-time to taking it full-time. Tell us about that journey and some of the challenges that you may have faced early on.
Going from part-time to full-time was a blessing, but not necessarily a big choice. In 2009, the company I was working for went from 44 to 13. And yours truly was not one of those 13. We had 6 kids and a quite small baby, but some of the older kids was socially, we determined that it's just not a good time to move them. And so I said, well, I think I could do this full time. We had done some other things, and it's like, okay, let's make a go of it. And yeah, early on, it was rough. I had been working. I lived where I live now, but my day consisted of getting up in the morning, go to work, and coming home. Right? I knew very few people, and so, you've already talked to those people. How do you find new people? And became pretty proficient and excited about branching out and everything I could do, right? To meet more people, to do social marketing, to whatever it is. And for quite a while, it was quite rough, I had some collaborations with a couple of people that came along that allowed me to do split some business once I became full-time and started to learn more and more how to do it. I'll specifically how to have people refer me, right? Right now, most of what I do is from referral. You treat people right and you do it right for them and teach them right. Most of them are going to come back and get a second or third policy. I mean, one of my favorite stories is that there's two men that went to school together and they started a business together, and I talked to them. The one I played basketball with, right, early morning, and talked to him about it. Yeah, okay, this is really cool. They understood it, and they got a policy. It was $5,000 a year premium, both of them. 6 months later, they called me. Says, this is not big enough. We need another one. It's got to be $20,000 a year. Cool. Okay. And about a year after that, they called back and said, we need another one. We need a $50,000 a year. So between those two, that was pretty good commission, a story that have people come back. When you do it right for people and teach them right and understand it and follow up with them, it seems like it works really good.
What you just said is I tell a lot of new agents that. I said, listen, you're doing it right, and you have a good client when they say you didn't sell me enough, because they get it, they understand what it is, and it all goes back to the book. Like you said, it's all in the book about capitalization, and you want to access the big money, then guess what? That means you got to design, deliver something that can handle what they need, what their needs are. They don't do it just because they want to do it. They have a need for more cash, right? So that's a good point.
Every time I meet with someone for the first time, I get them a book, right? And I was just doing my taxes before I got on here. I got to finish up my taxes, and you should see the list of charges from the post office, right? Because I go use the priority mail, right? The 2 days fits it ship. I just put it in there and mail it off. And at any given time, I have right now I'm kind of low, and I think you only have 20 books in my cupboard right there. But any given time, most of the time, I have a case or more. I have published my own book, right? Talking about it, plan on publishing another book. Yet it's always comes back to Nelson's, right? It's just a retelling of what he does, right? It's just you really don't need to go any further. Part of publishing a book was to help me have some credibility more than anything, like a business card. But
I guess a critical question here: are you selling the book or giving it away?
I'm supposed to say I'm selling it. However, I'm collecting a fee a little. There is a little bit of a fee, and how I'm set up for them to actually be able to talk to me. So, in a sense, yeah, I really am selling it. But it's cool. I mean, when they read it, it's slam dunk. You got a customer. And when I bring new agents on, I remember very distinctly Nelson saying, he says, "Look, I'll give you a challenge," and I think even offered to give you your money back. He says, "You buy 10 books." And you go sell those 10 books to 10 people. If you don't get 3 customers out of those 10, I'll buy your books back. Something along those lines, right? And just recently I have done that. We had a new guy come into our agency, and he's actually, his second language is English, and his Spanish isn't all that good. And I said, well, buy 10 of each. and get him out there. And I was on with him earlier this morning, and he just recently did a policy for $2,000 a month. Nice little policy, designed right the way Nelson talks about, and it's cool. So I still use that all the time. What Nelson had used in his seminar, sell 10 books, you'll get 3 customers. If you really think about that, that's a good return on investment.
Well, oh yeah. Plus, if you do sell the books, then you get a little profit on the side there also, right?
Yeah, not enough to finance much, but there is profit.
Well, no, I think that, Nelson used to say, and, we talk about this now with, in our coaching academy that we've launched for our practitioner students and our practitioners. Part of that 10 book challenge is that people aren't going to read something that you just give them. But if they have, some skin in the game, some money in the game, they're going to read it because they invested in it. And so that's where all that came from for any of our listeners or viewers who don't know what we're talking about. That's what that is, the 10 book challenge.
So I have to tell you about one of my clients, right? This is early on. And I'm from Pocatello, Idaho. That's where I grew up. And so my family was still there, right? And so there's some people, friends of my dad's and stuff, that I started saying, well, maybe I should talk to them. Maybe I should talk to them, attempting to find something. And there's this chiropractor. I went and talked to him. His dad was a chiropractor, and my dad were good friends. And so there's a little bit of association there. And I sold him the book. I was really persistent in getting an appointment with him, but then I sold him the book. I said, well, you got to read it. And I came back, you got to read it, you got to read it, you got to read it. It kept going on and on and on. And I'm pretty sure it was over a year. I kid you not, on Thanksgiving Day, he calls me. And I'm like, he goes, are you in town? I said, yeah, I am. It's Thanksgiving with my family, my mom and dad and everything. He goes, I just read the book. Can you come in tomorrow? The office isn't open. Can you come in? He had read the book in the bathtub, right? It's the only time he got some time alone. He could unhook, right? He'd gone into the bathroom with Thanksgiving afternoon, shut the door, drew a bath, and in the bathtub, he read Nelson's book. And obviously got out of the bathtub to call me. He said, we've got to talk tomorrow. And it's one of my biggest policies. Well, that policy is one of the biggest policies I've ever sold. And I've sold more than one to him, right? And he told me just recently, I was up there, he's showing me his operation. And he had shown me this new area that he had purchased. So he has his clinic, right? And then over close is another building. It was a dentist or someone. So he bought his building because he was retiring, and he made it into a studio and a production thing for some of the supplies he used. And he was telling me, he says, yeah, by doing this, I'm able to reduce my overhead by $20,000 a month. I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. And then he went on, he says, I would have never been able to do this if you hadn't taught me about being my own banker.
So how would he reduce his cash flow requirements, or reduce his cost by $20,000 a month by buying a whole life insurance policy or policies and implement an IBC?
Well, what he was doing was he buying some of his supplies at retail, basically, right? And what he figured out is, well, I can make those at a lot less. However, to get the supplies, the equipment, and everything was a big capital outlay. Well, the source of that capital outlay was simply a form to get a loan against his policy. Comes in, boom, he's in business, right? And now he is and so is basically two business. This business that he started could sell to the other business basically at $20K a month less. Completely impossible if you don't have capital, right? The policy was well capitalized. I mean, the guy uses it.
That's better than I anticipated. That's great. Yeah. It's not the policy necessarily, it's how you use the policy responsibly. Yeah.
Well, it's the person, right? If I've had others that are irresponsible, right? And they, oh yeah, we'll do it. I don't have to pay it back. Blah, blah, blah. No, I don't care about policy design. I don't care a whole lot about companies. It's all about the individual and what they're doing. They don't have an understanding. They don't have discipline. It doesn't work. Sorry. I mean, I tell people all the time, I said, there is a possibility for you to lose money with this. If you're, irresponsible, you're not disciplined, you will not follow what you need to do this can be not good for you. And I don't want to work for you if they're going to be that way. If you're going to follow this will be the best financial decision you've ever made, because everything else from here on out becomes better.
That's so powerful and, so important for people to understand when they're new or they're in the IBC journey. That's so important. So thank you for talking about that and addressing that. Talk a little bit about when you first started, you became a practitioner. How have you grown in your practice since then? You talked about how you still read the book every single year. You bring in your agents, y'all discuss that book. You keep it front and center as the source of everything you're doing. But how else have you changed and grown in your practice?
It's really easy to talk about a concept, and it's simply that. It's conceptual. My first policy was not a huge policy. However, I learned right away. I mean, like when I was calculating how much premium can I do, yada, yada, yada. And I also really needed a riding lawnmower. Okay. I have a fairly large backyard. I have some rental properties that I take care of the maintenance and stuff on. And it dawned on me, wait a minute, I can take my premium, I can put it as my first premium, and there'll be enough there that I can take a loan against it and get my riding lawnmower. I mean, right there, I knew it's an and, right? It's not an either or decision. And so I bought that riding lawnmower. I hired my boys to drive it down to the one property, mow the lawn. They'd drive it back. They thought they were pretty special. They were not that old, but right away understood, okay, there's an example. And I still tells that story. That's what I figured out because I had the property then make the payments, right? And when I got done, my policy was restored to its full value. I could borrow against that again. And I still had the riding lawnmower, right? So I'd recaptured the capital, recaptured a lot of the interest that would have gone someplace else anyway. And the riding lawnmower still in my garage. Well, it's like Nelson used to say that you have a dive restaurant. What do? They don't go open a brand new location. They go find a rundown location exactly like the other location and open up there. Or the bank opens up another branch. You get another policy, right? And that's what I figured out. I had actually bought this building. I'm in a small office building in downtown Logan, Utah, where I live. And I had financed it through a bank that's just a couple blocks here. Mortgage was just shy of $2,000, 1996-13. Right. And what I noticed, and everybody in mine sort of knows this, if you have anything to do with real estate or buying a house or anything, you write out the check, the bank cashes it, you get a little bit of more interest. I mean, a little bit of principal and a whole lot of interest. Right. Yet the other thing is you have access to none of that. Right. I generated $2,000 from rents and things and wrote it out to them, but I didn't have access to that. Well, with my experience with the riding lawnmower, of course, I expanded. I got a bigger policy on me. I started buying policies on each one of my kids. And I mean, now I'm not as good as Nelson. I think one time I heard Nelson say he had 42 or 43. I only have 10. But I expanded what I was doing. Got to the point where I could take a loan against those policies. Money came to me. I walked over to Cache Valley Bank and I paid them off. Well, we're not out of debt, right? And so the very next month, the tenants didn't tell any difference. I mean, even anybody else walking by could not tell a difference. The only difference was I wrote out the check to the insurance company instead of the bank. Cool thing though, when they cash the check, I have access to almost the full amount. That $2,000, I have access to it in the event I wanted to take another loan. And it blew my mind. It's like, okay, well, and for 1 year, I have access to $24,000 that I didn't have the year before. Can I build more policies? Can I build more real estate? Can I go after different stuff, right? I tell that story all the time. And so my journey somewhat has been a journey of discovery for myself that I've planned all along. I mean, I can tell you 4 of my 6 kids, I have financed their car purchase for them. They pay market interest rate. I have 2 of them right now. My oldest daughter and my youngest son are both their cars are financed right now, and I can watch it one comes the first of the month, one's like the 15th a month, but it's ACH right out of their account, right to the policy, right? They're being responsible. They're understanding the family banking system. They understand that their car payment is making things good for me when I get to, passive income time. It'd be good for them because it's a policy on them, right? That they'll be able to use when I'm gone. And there's a death benefit there for their kids that don't even exist yet. So their car payment is not only getting them a car, it's affecting 3 generations. That's like and time again, there's another example where I actually have done policies that I wish I could do differently. My mother-in-law, she had an ancestor pass away and she came into some money and she wanted to do something. So she talked to me about it. I said, well, let's do it this way. And a few years later, there was someone who asked me, can I do this? I go, oh man, that's a great idea. I should have done that for my mother-in-law. But so yeah, some of my practicing now is has come from people asking me questions. Is this possible?
That's great advice. And I think that's what is so neat about this community is people are constantly learning, and they never stop learning and growing in their practice. And they're taking advice from other people or from their clients who really understand this and really they catch on. And so I think that's wonderful to talk about. The thing that that strikes me when you're telling your story and talking about some of the clients that you're working with. You've got clients who are, working at a really high level, but then, you're talking about just in your personal life, using these policies that are not massive policies. And that's something that we hear, over and over again out there in the noise of the internet and social media world, that this is just for rich people. This is just something that rich people can do. So, I think that that's what's so neat about your story is that you're working with all different types of people and all different types of clients and different income levels. So I hope that people hear that.
I want to add a little bit. My second oldest, he came home from school one day. I think he was 12 or 13. He said, "I want to be a hunter. I want to be a hunter." He told his mom this, and he goes, and she talked to me a little bit. "Well, we don't really have a gun. We don't have a rifle. Your dad's hunted a lot when he was a kid, but it doesn't do much now anymore, right?" He says, "Well, I'm going to go get a job." So he walked up the street. We have a tree farm not far from us. And he walked up, came back. He had secured some employment. And, well, what do you need? Well, you're going to need a rifle. Well, you need a spotting scope. And so before he could be old enough and go through a hunter safety and everything and be able to carry a gun on his own, he says, "Well, I'm going to hunt sheds," which is when the deer drop their antlers, right? They're called sheds. He wanted a spotting scope. And so he came to me and he said, "Well, this is how much it is." And I looked at it and said, "Well, that's not a very good one. What's the best one?" It's like, "Well, it's this much. I can't afford that." I said, "Well, there's a thing called the family bank." And so we walked through it at a very young age, and we took a loan against his policy that I had on him, went and bought that spotting scope. And so now he was walking around with one of the better scopes you can buy with people that were, quite a bit older than him. He got to be friends with people in the community that hunt and stuff, but he understood it. He did small jobs to make sure he could make his payments every month, from painting to sprinkler repair to all kinds of different things, right? So yeah, everyday people, it's not for the wealthy. The thing is it's for everyone that wants to become wealthy, right? It's a process. It's a lifestyle. It's a way to do that. And by financing, by controlling the financing function in your life, there's enough money there to make you really quite wealthy.
You're singing my song, man. And the first policy I bought, I think it was maybe $500 a year annual premium. And I thought that was enormous.
And I know the story, David. I know the story. You came to wherever it was, whether Nelson and his wife was coming to Hawaii or whatever, but you're going in to have the discussion with Nelson about asking for his permission to ask your wife, right, to marry you. And he didn't give you permission. He handed you an application, right? And you had to sign a policy. Isn't that how it went? Something along those lines?
I didn't ask him permission. I proposed and then talked to him after that. And yeah, the discussion was sign this. It was like, okay, done deal. Oh, by the way, what is it?
So were you a major, a colonel at that time? What were you at that time?
I was a second lieutenant.
Oh, man, I thought maybe you had higher rank and that's why you were so bold to ask first and not ask and then get permission later.
Well, no, it was actually how many days before the wedding?
It was like 2 or 3 days before the weddings when I met him for the first time.
It was the first time they met, and it was a couple of days before the wedding. So, but it's thankfully that marriage has held up. How many years did y'all just celebrate? Not a couple weeks ago.
46. But the important point was Nelson Nash wasn't a celebrity. He was just an insurance agent. So he had no credibility with me at all, except for my future father-in-law. No. Again, a joke. There we go.
But we all kind of have those stories, which is funny because, when I got married, my husband kind of had a similar conversation with with Nelson. And so, Dad and I were just talking about those policies actually earlier today. And but we're just so thankful for that. And, how he influenced our family and so many other families in North America now. It's really expanded. So.
Yeah. Lee, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, every your husband JB and Lauren's husband John, the first thing they did was sign apps also. Not for me, but from Nelson. So yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. So hey, I'm not the only guy. Yeah, good.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for sharing some of your stories today, and especially, your time with Nelson. And as we wrap up our time together, I just want to ask you to share what the infinite banking concept means to you.
Basically who I am. I don't know if that answers the question. I live it. I mean, I do it. I take policies, loans. I have multiple policies. I'm talking to my kids about it all the time. I do it full time. And so what does it mean to me? What does oxygen mean to you? It's just something that's everything I do, right? All the time. I'm talking about it all the time and I'm talking to other people about it simply to help them, right? One thing it does mean, it goes back to that thing that I said with the professor. He says, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich? I don't know that I am rich monetarily, but man, I have control of my time and I have control of the banking function. I want to finance something, I can do it. Have I had cool investments come along like Nelson's? I mean, the classic one that he talks about, the real estate venture, the guy came to him and said, hey, if you give me some money, I'll sell you this for so much on the dollar, right? And he got a great deal, and it was all made possible by having cash value, right? He could walk down the street, and I think it was a State Farm one, right, that he went in and got that first loan from, and he went to the guy before he could change his mind and do that. I've had some cool investments come along like as well, and the cash value gives you that opportunity, right? Being your own banker doesn't mean that you check your brain at the door and anything you just borrow and use or whatever, right? You're in a position of liquidity and strength. And really the golden rule, he who has the gold makes the rules, that Nelson teaches or taught, really is true.